Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Tolley.
I got rid of it.
It's all good. No worries. So I was thinking about Bobby's story, and about him being in that locker room. So I have a story. Figured I'd start with this. Somebody was mentioning customer service and how it's important. And I was helping a business in Washington State, actually. And part of the process was I was helping get more vendors and suppliers for this business. And this business was open to the public, and like most businesses, it's busy, 4 to 7 in the afternoon. And I had a 5:30 meeting with this vendor. So I thought, oh man, I better hurry up and use the restroom before my meeting. So I go into the restroom, and there's a line. Like, there's just a massive line. And I'm thinking, well, this is going to take forever. So, I'm waiting in line, and, I get to a urinal. And I don't know if women know this, but men do. You have, like, the regular one, the regular one, the regular one, the regular one, and then that one that's way down here, right? For kids or whatever. So me and this other guy pull in at the same time, and it's kind of it's kind of protocol just to look straight forward, right? You don't look to the right, you don't look to the left, you just like pick a spot on the tile and just examine it as if there's something interesting. It's true. So anyway, but since me and him are both pulling up at the same time, I figure I'll just, look over and say hey or whatever. I said, he got stuck with the small one on. So now everybody in line is now laughing, which is causing me to laugh. So I'm laughing at him, and my face is turning beet red. I'm thinking, oh man, how much worse can today get? Well, remember that 5:30 meeting? It was with that. I thought I brought my bottle up here with me. All right, so I'm not sure what I wanted to talk about when I got here because, like I said, I kind of wing it. I do 2 hours a day on the radio, so an hour's a little light. Matter of fact, my business seminar is usually 2 days. So we're just going to kind of cover some stuff that I found interesting today. I wanted to start with a little bit of my bio, partially because 2 people in this room have went to high school where I go to high school. Anybody else in this room go to Madison East High School? Okay, just checking, because it was getting weird for a while. Bobby went there. I'm like, seriously? And he went in 1959 or something, a little bit before me.
He taught in 53.
Oh, geez. Okay. So he was there a long, long time ago. Oh yeah, that's better. But here's my bio. And the reason I'm telling you is because most of you probably don't know who I am. But also because I wanted to give you a little bit of hope. I went to Madison East High School. And when I graduated, I was pretty much functionally illiterate. I went to go take an exam, and I realized, wow, I'm pretty bad here. I can't really understand what's on the test. But it turns out I was really good at football, so they just kept passing me. And the principal at the time was a former linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. The counselor was one of the coaches. So they just said, you keep performing, and we'll keep passing you. And at the time I thought, well, that's cool. Who wouldn't agree to that, Unless you're smart, then you wouldn't agree to it. But anyway, I agreed to it. I'm like, yeah, that's fine with me. And then I stopped growing, and there's not too many 5'7" linebackers, so that dream kind of ended. But I was also so shy. I had a speech impediment too, by the way. I was also so shy that I couldn't order a hamburger from McDonald's. If somebody knocked on the door or the phone rang, I would run to a bedroom. Like I was literally panic-stricken with any sort of human interaction. And here we are, 2015, and I hosted a nationally syndicated talk show. So I've come a long way. And I say that because I know a lot of you are at a place where you're thinking, man, what do I have to do to break through? When I asked that question, how many people were employees? Over half the room raised their hand. And I thought that was a little alarming, to be honest. Because when we talk about economic development, there's a place for employment, obviously. But economic development is based on entrepreneurship. It's based on business. So that's really where my story starts. At 18 years old, I graduated and I started my first business. I actually started one in middle school. It was a gambling ring, but I don't count that. Paid a lot of money, though. Anyway, so that entrepreneurial spirit was already there. I already knew that something was awry. You know, I started my senior year teaching myself how to read, and I had a little brother. And I would use CJ and Run books, you know, Run, Spot, Run, all that sort of stuff. And he was a surprise baby, so he was way younger. So he was just learning how to read, so he was actually teaching me in a lot of cases. But one of the things they tell you to read is magazines, because magazines are written at an 8th grade level, because most Americans are stupid. But it is, it's the way that it is. So they say read a lot of magazines, and I was reading the Forbes 400, and I noticed out of the 400 wealthiest people on the list, none of them had a job. None of them. And I thought to myself, wait a second, if there's 295 million people, which is what there was back then, if there's 295 million people in this country doing the go to school, go to college, get good grades, get a good job, and that'll make you happy, yet none of them have made it on this list, something's wrong. And it wasn't my goal to be rich, you know, it's not my goal to be, you know, $40 billion in the bank or anything like that, but it's a good indication. And then I started looking at the list in more detail. Number 1 dropped out of school, number 2 dropped out of school, number 4 dropped out of school, number 6 dropped out of school, number 8 never went to school. He had an 8th grade education. And I said, wait a second. If education was the way to go, why isn't it reflected on this list? And I remember being on the air recently when Steve Jobs died. And people were calling in saying, oh man, Steve Jobs was such an American hero. We need more Steve Jobses. And I agree. I love entrepreneurship. But I remember asking these parents who were calling in, I said, wait a second, let's just stop, be honest. If your kid came home and said, Mom, Dad, I'm dropping out, you'd have a heart attack. And then if they said, and by the way, I want to start a business, you'd then roll over in the grave after the heart attack. So most of us don't want that entrepreneurial spirit, which is really vital to where we are as a country and why counties are suffering. Because we teach, here's the deal. We teach a mechanics versus driver system of business. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But so my story was, I started a business at 18. It failed miserably because I was too shy to talk to anybody, which is kind of key in business. So it failed. But by the time I turned 20, I had a second one, 21, 22, I had another one. And I started getting good at this thing called starting businesses. And I remember I was actually in Madison, Wisconsin. I was sitting across the table from a couple in their 30s. They had a couple kids. And we came up with this plan to get them in business, and it was working, right? And they look at me and they start crying. And you know, at 21, 22, you're in business for cars and girls, you know. But they start crying, I'm like, what are you crying for? And they said, we've been praying for months for something to change. And that got me thinking, you know, how many more people are going to bed every night thinking, is this all life is? And then they wake up thinking, oh man, I have to do it again. And what's crazy is that's a very popular thought process. I've talked to people who make $5, $6, $7 million a year. They think the same thing. Because it's not about money. But it's about controlling your time and your destiny and all that sort of stuff. So that happened, and I started getting really good at that. And they asked me to speak in front of groups. And then that turned into, can you take that same approach that you took to business, the logic, reason, and strategy, and put that into, say, politics? And I did, so that worked out pretty well. And then can you put it into news and current events? And I did, and that worked out pretty well. And then they said, well, can you write a book? And I did. The first book I wrote was Quit Your Job or Die, Discover the Importance of Self-Employment. And initially I thought it was just going to be a ha-ha funny working title, you know, because usually you pick a title, write a book, go back later and give it a better title. But as I was doing research for the book, I realized, wow, employment is crazy dangerous. It is by far the #1 killer in this country. And I kid you not. You know, when I said earlier that suicide now outranks traffic fatalities, and the #1 cause for suicide is financial stress, that's because of employment. Employment's the #1 cause for divorce, #1 cause for drug use, #1 cause for affairs, #1 cause for teen pregnancy in a home, even if your teen's not the one working. And I started doing the research. I'm like, man, this is crazy. Why are we teaching this model? Where did this model come from? And it's not that old, to be honest with you. Real mass employment started about 1940, 20s, actually en masse, write about the New Deal. Everybody know what the New Deal is? I'm assuming that's yes. Not very many hands went up. If so, you're proving my point about public schools. You should all know what the New Deal is. But anyway, that turned into the show I'm doing now and blah, 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 blah. I really hate my own bio. You can look it up online or something. Just Google me. So anyway, back to the business side. I started realizing as I went to more and more conferences and more organizations that there was a strong push on the mechanical side of business, right? And I was thinking, well, you know, this is fine, this is good, but how many of you have kids? Okay, a lot of you. If your 15-year-old daughter said, Mom, Dad, it's time for me to start driving, would you sit her down and say, okay, well, let me explain to you how the internal combustion engine works. There's a piston and a cylinder. When it compresses, there's an air and gas mixture. Spark plug lights the mixture, forces the piston down, which stirs the crank. Here's the keys, honey. Good luck on your trip. Nobody would be that stupid, right? But that's unfortunately what we do in business. We take this approach of, well, is my SBA loan filled out correctly? Do I have my registration with the government vending website? And we go through this mechanical list. And it's not that that's not important. It really is. But it's not what determines success. And you can always hire a mechanic, right? If anything, you would teach your daughter, hey, you know what? I'm going to teach you how to find a good mechanic. I'm going to teach you so you don't get ripped off. But the primary purpose here is to teach you how to drive. Does that make sense? So what we developed over the course of the last 15 years of helping businesses is about 50 areas of business that qualify as driving areas. Things like marketing, leadership, advertising, which we're going to talk about in a second, some of these areas where we don't focus on. There are so many business owners. 50% of all businesses in this country have to have a secondary source of income in order to stay open. That's crazy. Because we don't teach the driving side of this.